Welcome back to Preserve Health Talks. I'm Dr. Ira Pearlstein with my co-host.
Leah again.
And today we have a follow-up episode. Our follow-up episode is with Rabbi Mathew Durbin from Temple Bet Hayam. Good morning, Rabbi.
Good morning.
And so we're going to follow up on how healthcare and religion are often combined and sometimes often conflict with each other. And I thought today we'd start off by talking about dietary laws. And Judaism and the Muslim religion have a lot of strict dietary laws. And are they spiritual? Are they related to your health? We're going to find that out in the next few minutes. So the laws in Judaism of keeping kosher are among the most well-known aspects of Jewish observance. From a religious standpoint, and I ask you that because you're a rabbi, what are the core principles behind these dietary restrictions?
So it's a great question. And when we examine the laws of kashrut, those dietary restrictions, it's looking at it from a perspective, as you mentioned, of health and benefit, right? As Jews, we're told we are not to mix milk and meat. Of course, there is some dissension as to what is considered meat. Of course, the Talmud says that meat itself is like cow, as opposed to chicken, which is poultry. Although that opinion is not well accepted. But when we look at it, it's this understanding: you shall not mix, or you shall not mix a kid in its mother's milk. And we can argue and debate what that may mean, but really it's the separation, right? It's to separate, and in some way I believe that some of the dietary restrictions are about being mindful, right? It's about being mindful of what we eat, what we consume, how it's processed, and how the benefit of it. From a traditional legal perspective of kashrut, no bottom feeders, right? No shrimp, no pork, no seafood. I shouldn't say seafood. No shellfish, which is different than obviously seafood. And there are some gray zones within it. I mean, perhaps the most classic gray zone is swordfish, right? As observant Jews, we can't eat baby swordfish, but we can eat adult swordfish because they lose their fins and scales as they mature and get older. So, you know, we're told also animals that have cloven hooves, so therefore cows are permissible, whereas something like horses, camels, those type would not be permissible.
So the original derivation of these laws of keeping kosher, health benefits, religious, spirituality reasons, or both?
I think it's an amalgam of all. I think especially in our day today, if we look at it, and especially look over the last 1,500 years or 1,000 years, looking back to the Middle Ages, a large part of it was to dissociate ourselves from everyone else. That in some way it was, we have our own set of dietary restrictions that sets us apart from the rest of the population, but at the same time allows us the opportunity to be spiritual. It's being mindful of the foods that we consume. I mean, a classic example is, how many of us are aware that when you go to Publix, for example, and you go buy any produce, or say tomatoes, which are 90% grown here in Florida, right, around the country, we take them, we put them in a cart, and then we pay for them. As opposed to what I would say a Jewish perspective would be, is to examine it and understand it in terms of, there are tomato plantations, there are workers who work the field, they pick them, they then bring them to their supervisor, who then takes that, puts it on a truck, they load it, right? The whole processing that I don't think that we fully understand. I hate to say it's first world problems, but it's I don't think that we actually take the time. And I think that's where Judaism comes in, to say, first and foremost, we are a religion that are based on time, but also value and meaning behind that. And I think especially with the laws of kashrut, we know with certain foods, which I'm sure you are more familiar than I, just with, say pork. Well, trichinosis happens in that can get you very sick. Well, when you look at it, most observant Jews don't have that because we don't eat it. When you look back 20 years ago to England's mad cow disease, well, if you were an observant practicing Jew, you didn't eat non-kosher meat. Even though cow is kosher, it has to be processed in a kosher way, right? If you look at the percentage of how many Orthodox Jews got mad cow disease in Britain, is very small, if any, whereas obviously the numbers are much larger. But I think it is about our ability to be aware, our ability to set ourselves apart from everyone else, without going into the rabbinic legal discussions of it.
Right. So these rules had underlying health rationals, but they were also, would you say, spiritual in nature?
Mm-hmm. I do. And I think that spirituality comes into it through our own ability to process what we're doing. I have a powerful example. When I was in rabbinical school, I have a colleague of mine and said, let's eat together. And he posed a very simple question. How many of us, when we have let's just say a sandwich, for example, how long does that take to eat? 3 minutes? 5 minutes? So, both had our sandwiches. And we started this cathartic exercise, which I'm not 100% comfortable with, but I decided to, let's try it. We close our eyes, right? The average person does not chew 100 times before swallowing their food, right? We inhale our food, right? It's like, I can't get enough food, right? And in some way, what we did was we stopped it and started to actually examine what we were doing. So we chewed for X amount of time. Next thing I knew, that tiny 6-inch sandwich took me 90 minutes to eat. I was late for class. And the embarrassing part of saying, why are you late? I'm sorry, I was eating my lunch. Well, come on, we give you an hour for lunch. How is it that you spent all that time? And actually the response was, I had a spiritual moment with God and I had a spiritual moment with a colleague where actually it was really transformative because I actually learned and saw in some way and felt the presence of God of slow down. I mean, how many people choke on food every single year? Right? And I think beyond that obvious health benefit, there's something there too of just being in the moment and really having it sit and being comfortable with that.
Are there any contemporary interpretations of kosher laws that align with modern nutrition or wellness trends?
I mean, certainly the no eating pork, certain types of cuts of meat we are not allowed to eat traditionally as Jews. The tenderloin, right? We're not supposed to eat, which is, of course, from what I understand, the tastiest part of a filet mignon. But at the same time, the health benefits and how standards have changed over time. I mean, I think that's also the beauty of Judaism is that these statements and pronouncements and laws that were put forward are very, how to put it, the Torah comes out and uses it as a blueprint, so to speak, right? Classic example, Shabbat, right? It says, you shall observe and you shall keep and guard Shabbat. Doesn't tell you how to do it. The laws of kashrut, the Torah comes out and says, these are permissible, these are non-permissible animals, but they don't give the reason in some way as to the depth and the perspective. Why? And that comes out of early rabbinic literature, what we would call the Mishnah, which is the oral tradition of Torah. So we were given 2 Torahs on Mount Sinai, the written, the Torah, and the Mishnah, the oral. And then a later generation of rabbis came in and expounded on those laws. Well, what does it really mean to have an animal that, is kosher or is not kosher?
So did these laws evolve over time, or were they all handed down at once?
I don't know if it was handed down all at once, but I think there was a slow progression, I think, with a lot of the laws of kashrut. Some of them are fairly obvious, right? You accidentally hit a cow on a highway, and you're like, the cow accidentally got in front of my car, I killed it. Well, it's fresh meat. Throw it on the back of my car and we'll cook it. And the Torah says no, right? In not so many words, no roadkill. You can't eat an animal that has died of unnatural causes, right? And I, again, trained as a rabbi, not a physician, right? I would assume that if an animal died of unnatural causes, that there would be something that could harm human beings through their consumption. But I believe, and look, the challenge with any rabbi or any Jewish person is that you ask one question and you could have 30 different responses. And I think that is the beauty of faith and of
But I
religion.
think that all meat that we eat, whether it's kosher or non-kosher, the animal dies of an unnatural cause. We don't wait for the animal to have a heart attack to die.
No.
We're killing off these animals for food.
But if an animal were to die of disease, right, and the average person seeing that animal carcass and not know that it died of disease, if you were to consume that, there could be other detrimental health benefit,
Gotcha.
things.
We're going to change track a little bit and talk about cleanliness.
So, can you explain the role of the mikveh in Jewish tradition, particularly how it relates to ritual purity and cleanliness?
So it's a great question. So the mikveh itself, in its broadest and most easiest to understanding, is that a mikveh itself is a collection of rainwater that is constantly flowing. Okay, so you couldn't go to a mikveh in your own private pool. Okay, but you could go to God's greatest mikveh right behind me, being the ocean, because it is constantly flowing. The purity aspect is in some way to almost rid our body of, I don't want to say of sin, but to cleanse oneself, right? Cleanliness, it's not by accident that the famous adage that says cleanliness is close to godliness comes out of it, is that with the ability to have that in the back of our minds and how we enter in the mikveh is really important. Most women enter mikveh after their menstrual cycle as a form of ritual purity. Men generally, in theory, go to the mikveh before Shabbat to kind of cleanse themselves as they go pure through worship. There's a tradition that men and women go to the mikveh before they get married, kind of putting the past behind us as we enter into a new state. For those who choose Judaism, and I'm actually very cautious not to use the word conversion, even though that is the process, but in at least my belief, it's not one converted to Judaism, that one chose Judaism as a faith, that we go to the mikveh itself as almost like a states of liminality, anthropologically speaking, right? As they go onto the dry ground, onto sand, and they've taken the course of study and they've done everything that the prerequisites that they've done. As they go into the water and they say, we have 3 blessings that they say as they undergo the mikveh, they submerge themselves completely. And they resubmerge, and they do it 3 times. And of course, the tradition is that one must hear the blessings and the words being said. And after that 3rd time, as they're in the water, they're in this state of liminality. They have no status whatsoever. They're not previous status, not Jewish status. It's like in limbo. And as they enter in onto dry ground, that moment, their status has been conferred. So it's like those states of liminality where you go through these different phases in order to spiritually cleanse one's body, one's mind, and one's thoughts towards.
So then while the mikveh, or the ritual bath, is spiritual in its intent, do you see it reflecting ideas of hygiene or better public health?
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely. And I think it goes beyond just the mikveh, right? You know, we have a tradition where we wash our hands before every meal, right? We ritualize it during Passover, during our Passover Seder, but there is this understanding that we say a blessing as we wash our hands. And I think when we go back throughout the course of time, not to say that washing one's hands and the cleanliness helped the Jews survive, the Black Death and the bubonic plague, but it minimized the amount of death that did occur. And that also goes back to kashrut, to the laws of the dietary laws. When you look at the fact that a third of Europe was wiped out by this disease, right? The Europeans, and this is probably for another show of anti-Semitism, but right, would blame the Jews. Why are you not dying in mass numbers like we are? Well, we have separate foods that we eat. We also wash our hands. Now, we know in some way the washing of the hands with water, again, is, I don't know if that's just placating it or if it actually makes a difference, but I think the actual act of washing itself is both spiritual, it's mindful, making us aware of what we're doing, and at the same time helps us try and cleanse the world.
It's great having you on the show, and we're running short on
Come
time,
on.
so I'm going to have Leah ask the final question for today's show.
So how has Jewish law historically engaged with medical professionals or scientific knowledge? Is there a tradition of collaboration or tension?
Judaism has always had in some way that deep connection with medicine and with modernity in some way, right? One of our most famous sages, Maimonides, was a physician. I believe he was the physician to the Sultan, right? He had medical knowledge. Now, I think as we go forward, and especially in our own modern day with technology and the advancement of medicine, I think that becomes much more challenging than it did in the past. So when you look at something like organ donation, for example, well, is it permissible? Well, I think the average Jew and the average observant Jew would say, well, absolutely, right? We should donate our organs because at the end of the day, it's called pekuach nefesh, to save a life. And yet you also have the other extreme that says, no, it's not your body to give away. For the body is given by God, the soul is given by God. Everything goes back to God. And I know that there are some, I'll speak personally, I struggled with ticking that box that said organ donation. I was like, well, I don't know. My wife said, come on, Rabbi, don't be stupid. Tick the box. And I really struggled. Because I guess in most of our minds we have this fear of, what if I'm going to need it? Well, in a logical way, I'm not going to need it. But if I can give the gift to somebody else, that's what's important. So I think I don't think in some way the challenges are any different than they were generations or millennia ago. I think the ability for human ingenuity and human intellect has drastically changed, especially with medicine, that says we have to try and find that balance between the both.
Certainly. And one closing comment. You used to have a radio show. I was on your radio show.
Yes, you were. Yep.
It was called A Priest and a Rabbi. Mm-hmm. So we're going to do a priest, a rabbi, a doctor, and a nurse practitioner.
I love it.
And we're going to see if we can't get Father Christian Anderson in for our next show.
Absolutely.
And we're going to look at the Catholic point of view compared to the Jewish point of view on some of these religious and health topics.
Yeah,
Thank you, everyone, for watching Preserve Health Talks. We'll see you on our next episode.